you need all sorts of diverse people in our industry to be able to deliver the message, and and also different temperaments. Sometimes you need somebody that needs to be like this, and sometimes you need somebody that can be very soft spoken and work with
Hmm.
people and understanding, but sometimes you need a hammer,
Yeah.
so you need your right tools.
What is up, everybody? We are back for another episode of the I Reach podcast, and I got a very special guest. We've been able to do some work together over the last few years that we'll get into, but this is Pete Roque. Pete, you're the National Director of Code Enforcement at Four Leaf, and so just want to say, man, thank you for taking the time to be on. You have got an amazing journey. You do some amazing things. And so I definitely want to make sure that we get a chance to get into it, man. And so thank you for being on today.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be here today, so thank you for the invite.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things with Outreach, man, is we always get a chance to highlight different stories, right? And how, people got to where they are, because everybody has their own journey, everybody has their own path. But when we're able to share that, and when you're able to share it, it can be a source of inspiration for so many others, as you know, with some of the work that we've just been able to do collectively together that we'll get into. But like, what inspired you to get into your field of work, your career path, in terms of code enforcement? And then for those who don't know what code enforcement is, you can unpack that as well.
Awesome. So, me getting into code enforcement, total accident. Never in a million years thought I was ever going to be a code enforcement officer or director or anything like that. It was a total sheer accident, and I'll get into the story. One of the things what code enforcement is, what we do is I try to break it down to make it simple. We keep neighborhoods clean and buildings safe for people to live in. That's essentially what we do. We do so much in between, whether it's dealing with the cannabis issues, the unhoused, the massage parlors, substandard housing, lead. I mean, we code enforcement touches so much on a daily basis that it's just a continually growing field and evolving field. So, how I got into code enforcement.
Yeah.
So what happened was I was in the military. I was in the Navy, and my brother had a seizure. Back home, uh, the fire department had a hard time taking my brother out, and so one of the reasons they had a hard time getting him out is because when we bought the house, it had a illegal construction, which made it like an egress issue. And we got written up, and the city came down on us after my brother had a seizure, and
Oh, wow.
I had to end up dealing with the code enforcement officer, who, by the way, was a total awesome individual who was working with me while I was overseas. So I was calling at 2 in the morning to deal with city of Long Beach, at different time zones. And he worked with me, and my parents got squared away, and I saw the impact that it caused, over to my parents, and just it's just a new field that I learned. Fast forward, I worked for the city of Bellflower, and an opening came up in code enforcement. I kind of knew what it was. Ended up meeting the code enforcement officers, gave it a shot, and just fell in love with it. And that's how I ended up in code enforcement.
Oh, wow, wow. And then how long has this been now?
It's been 20 years.
Wow, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the funny things is, Paul, the person that ended up writing my parents up, many years ago. Let's circle back 10 years later, after I started getting more involved in the industry. I ended up, I do a lot of teaching, national teaching engagements, and a lot of people seem like, oh, I want to be like that guy when I grow up. Well, one of with the inspector that wrote up my parents, he worked for a different jurisdiction, came up to me. He's like, "Hey, I've been following you for years. You're inspirational." I'm like, you're the reason I got into code enforcement. You wrote my parents up, and he totally knew who I was because of the time zone thing. That's what clicked in his memory, and he totally remembered. And it was just kind of the one of those aha moments where what, we actually make a difference in what we do and in people's lives.
Yeah, now that's very good, man. And when you think about just everything that it takes for you to have a safe environment and all of the regulations that you have to abide by to ensure that things are safely constructed, that things are in the right place, or you have the right proximity between certain things or structures or what have you. I think those things are really important, especially as you look in the built environment. Of course, with construction as well. I think that's where we got a chance to get connected for the first time back in, I think, 2022, when we were doing our I Built This event out in the California area and introducing, this younger demographic to different career pathways that exist within construction. And that's where the whole code enforcement side of construction came into play as well. And I know that you are a huge advocate in terms of education. And how did that begin to be, something that you were passionate about? Was it a passion growing up that you just were always kind of outward facing and giving back, and always wanted to help to educate others, and you were able to translate that into code enforcement? Or did a lot of the community engagement and education start for you personally once you moved into code enforcement?
Paul, growing up, nobody ever says I want to be a code enforcement officer when I grow up,
Right,
or a
right.
building inspector, or a planner, or a city official. People don't say that. So what happened to me was just sheer by accident. And once I got into doing the job in code enforcement, I realized, there's not a lot of succession going on. And a lot of times, guys like me see them like, hey, this is a world where a lot of people that look like me or like you don't, they're not in this field. It's,
That
typically,
is correct.
older white guys, and not a lot of women in this industry. So, I said, how do we get more people involved? And that's how I really got involved with the education, joined like a state association. Then I ended up doing the national association. And then I'm within a chapter in the International Code Council. So, you just tend to grow and grow and grow and get more people involved. And I'm involved with groups like Wicked, Women in Code Enforcement and Development, where we're helping mold the next generation of women. Same thing, we're doing the technical trade programs, where we're now teaching people how to do code enforcement at a young age. My son, he's 10 years old, and he says, hey, I want to be a code enforcement YouTuber when I grow up. I go, there's no such thing, but you can definitely do code enforcement. And then my son, he's a code enforcement officer. He works for Four Leaf. He works for us. He's in multiple jurisdictions doing code enforcement. And my middle one, I think right now there's a national certification effort going on at the International Code Council, and our goal is for him to be one of the youngest people to ever get a code enforcement certification. He's only 15. So so we're really striving, that we have to set the example. I have to set the example. My kids are setting the example that it can be done and it's possible.
Yeah, no, that's very good, man. And especially, the impact that you're having on your kids. When it comes to construction, a lot of times, one of the things that we talk about as we try to introduce these different career pathways to a younger demographic, well, as they are in adolescence and they're transitioning into young adulthood, like that time frame, they are very impressionable. And when you have, their parents' generation, right, that doesn't know a lot about what the industry can offer as well, a lot of times what we talk about is influencing the influencer. Right. So not only are we trying to have those partnerships and close the gap between the industry and education, and put counselors in a position to speak in an informed way about opportunities and the different career pathways that you can take within construction, which also includes the permitting side, the city official side, the code enforcement side, but it's being able to have those conversations with the parents of the child as well, because counselors are looked at as, like, how can you help us navigate through education into professional careers or, further education that's needed. And so if we can have those conversations with counselors, being able to put them in a position to speak in an informed way, or begin to have partnerships with industry where folks such as yourself can come in and speak about those different opportunities where there's exposure at an early age. Now they can operate from an informed position and understand what their options are. And I think that's one of the most critical things, especially in our communities, Black and brown communities, is being able to understand, okay, these are your options, right? Like, you have more than just this one or two or three options that you see in front of you, but this is what you have the potential to become. This is what you can do, and then this is the support and the help that you can get so that you can transition into young adulthood at a very informed position. So no, I mean, that's good that you're doing that now, because I think it definitely pays off. And with your kids being able to speak to that now, because they're at that age where, what your peers are doing becomes, it carries a lot of weight. So then they can have those conversations with their peers, and in a more organic way. And of course, their peers can identify with them. And then now they begin to think about a career pathway that they hadn't even considered and probably didn't even know about.
No, I totally agree with you. One of the things growing up, we saw construction. In construction, you're just a guy in a construction hat and a hammer, and you
Yeah.
go. But there's so many levels of. You could be a plumber, you can be an electrician, you could be a engineer, you could be a designer. I mean, there's so many pathways, and then you throw code enforcement into it, and there's different areas of code enforcement you get into. So there's so many opportunities where you really don't need a college degree.
Yeah.
If you want to get into those upper management, higher paying level jobs where you're managing a whole group, then you need management skills, which would require you to go to college and learn those skills. So there's always advancements, and there's always that need to continue to learn. But from the get-go, you just need the ambition and the will and the experience to get into this field. And like you said, people of color like myself, I grew up in a very gang infested area. And when we were in Long Beach for, when I saw you, the area that I grew up in no longer exists because it was so substandard that the city of Long Beach just tore it down. It's a park
Wow.
now. So just going back and looking, I'm like, that's where I came from. And for me growing up, seeing cockroaches and rats, that was normal to me. It was like,
Mm.
where now I go into these houses and say, hey, the landlords need to make these areas better for the people living in them. So these are skills that I learned through education and things like that, to know what makes an environment safe. So when we do this, and being participating in the, I built these events, you see all these young impressionable minds that it opens their eyes, and you see like, wow, this is the next generation of people that are going to follow behind me. These are the, as long as they take the will and the initiative, I built this, provides this great venue for them to learn that. And at least put a little spark plug, because there's times where I can go to an elementary school. I go with my little kids book and little badges, and everybody wants to be a code enforcement officer. When we do the same presentation in middle school, everybody can't wait for me to shut up. When we go back to high school, they're like, oh wow, this is a viable option. And then when you do the college training, everybody's just, man, this is a great opportunity. And you have some folks that I've taught, I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've taught, they're now in supervisory roles. And, a lot of them, come up to me and say, hey, you were the reason why I really wanted to continue doing this. Such a great feeling. And, a lot of times it starts from maybe just a conversation that you provided, and then I built this event. And, so thank you for all the work that you do, and, and the venue that you provide. I mean, people don't realize how much work this stuff takes.
Yeah.
And the payoff for just to have one kid tell you, hey, thank you for changing my life and making it better, 100% worth it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, man. And I think the greatest investment that you can make is into somebody else. We spend a lot of time focusing on, what can add a perceived value to us, right? But I think the greatest investment that you can make is into another life, man. Because you never know. And so just being able to do that collectively with partners such as yourself, it's definitely worth the work, because it pays off. And when you think about kind of the education piece, right? What inspired you to start creating the educational resources and the books? Like, talk to me a bit about like how that came about.
So as a supervisor, you always hear staff. I'm a consultant now. And so we go to different jurisdictions and we help jurisdictions rebrand or rebuild their code enforcement divisions. Well, that started because when I started as a supervisor, people would complain, oh, we don't have enough training, we don't have this, we don't have that. So back in 2016, I created a website, and just started putting free training, free training. So when people say, "Oh, I don't have training," there's free training right here.
Yeah.
There's no excuses, and that kind of grew. And then going into joining associations, I always said, "Hey, people want to learn, and they don't have the resources like the budget to do. Provide free training." And I got a lot of resistance. Changing the norm. It's always hard, but once you establish making it like, you providing a venue for students is now becoming a norm. People are like, oh wow, they're coming to our town. They built the excitement. Well, what I'm doing is I'm creating that environment for people to want to learn and invest in themselves. If somebody doesn't want to learn, then they're not going to take the time and go on the website and learn. It's the people that really want to move forward, and those are the guys that become the supervisors. Now, I got to a point where I'm teaching college students and other professionals, but I'm like, we need to teach the next generation. And, I was sitting there and I wrote this children's book, and then, I showed it to my son on the computer and he goes, I don't get it. So I'm like, hey, get over here. How would you say this? And me and him went through the whole process of rewriting the book so he can understand it. And, at the end of the day, I gave him co-author credit because at the end of the day, the book totally changed to what I had done. This book is targeted for anybody between the ages of 6 and 10. And, at that time, he's 7 years old. So we did it. We did the illustration. And I modeled the code enforcement on for the first mentor that told me, hey, you're special. You need to continue doing and, filter out the noise. People are going to down on you because, this is different. And, he died a couple years ago. And my way to honor him was to put him in the book, and at the end of the day, I tell my son, hey, you're gonna get author, half author, and today he's the author. I had nothing to do with it. I do the publishing, And he goes and speaks, and the funny part is he goes speaks. He's now in a position where he speaks to other 10-year-olds, and says, "This is how I did it with my dad."
Wow.
And he talks about code enforcement and he understands. We also started doing TikToks where he identifies violations in a way people could understand them. Like an example would be, hey, why is this tall grass? Why is it a violation? I go, well, it attracts mosquitoes, like that can carry disease. Or, hey, this guy shouldn't be washing his stuff into the storm drain because it can get into the ocean. He understands this because he's been to him, he sees it. He can identify, hey, this unpermitted street vendor isn't washing his hands. He needs a permit, so he can get checked. So my son, who's 10 years old, can understand this.
Wow.
And I've made it a point to say, hey, if a 10-year-old can understand it, an adult can understand. So there's no reason why they should be violating the rules. But the main part is for my son to understand why the rules being broken, what the intent of it is, and then how to communicate that to the potential violator. So I think when we do that, we provide that benefit to the community and saying, hey, we're doing this to help you clean your own neighborhood. There's a sense of neighborhood pride and coming home and not being, scared that you're, your house is going to fall apart or somebody's going to come into your neighborhood. And then that's a whole different discussion. But but that's where the education for children kind of came from and how we got into writing the book.
I have a son who's 10 years old, and so that's hitting very personally to me. But I think just how empowering that is, and you're doing that because of like what you have done with your dad. Like that's very good. And it's during such an impressionable time in life as well. But talk to me a little bit about, because I'm sure you're educating him on, just the not only the different violations, but you mentioned like why things are the way that they are and why it even is a violation and why it should not happen, right? Because of the danger or the harm that it can put someone in. Um, a lot of people don't even know who to call, or a lot of people don't even know like how something should be. I think people can identify that okay, there's a problem here, but may not be able to intelligently speak to what that problem is, right? And then they don't know where to go to voice that issue. So talk to us a little bit about like where can people go when they do notice something that could be hazardous or could put others in danger that is just unsafe in general.
Awesome. So, yeah, and it's this is kind of funny because we get so many calls about random things. Some are legit violations,
Yeah,
and I have stories for days. I mean, stories with alligators and the archdiocese, and I mean, I have so many stories.
I'm
But
sure you do.
yeah, but end of the day, some things are rise to the level, and we as code enforcement officers have to prioritize on what it is that we're going to address. It's always health and safety number one. If it's going to impact somebody's well-being, we're going to respond to those first. I mean, we get something like, oh, somebody's sticking into my driveway. Oh, can you still get out? Yeah, okay. Well, it's not really
Yeah,
those, we get those, and we get the Karens that call like, oh, this guy is leaving his bicycle on the curb. We're like, well, it's the bicycle. There's no crime,
yeah.
But then we do get those odd ones where in one city it might be a violation, in another city it might not be a violation. And so an example would be like a kids playground equipment. What might be in a violation of the city if you have it in the front yard, and another city it might not. Or
Mm.
hanging your clothes, in the front, or those kind of things. Every city varies, from city to city. And us as code enforcement officers, I always tell people you got to give people the benefit of the doubt because people don't know the rules, so you have to educate them on the rules. Because I tell people this all the time, Paul. I go, look, when you bought your house or a vehicle, you didn't read the entire
Right,
contract, or
right.
people don't get a Reader's Digest version of the municipal code or the health and safety code. So we don't.
Yeah,
We just kind of roll, and we're like, oh, you know what? We don't realize that some things need permits. They need to be inspected, especially if you're doing electrical. You could cause a potential fire if you do it wrong. So this is why we require inspections. So end of the day, we get all these calls, and we have to be very knowledgeable on what it is that we're addressing. So and so let me circle back. What was the original question? I know you had. I start rambling. I'm sorry because I get too excited
yeah.
about
No,
it.
I'm just saying. I think like when others can feel that there's some sort of health and safety um, danger, right?
Yeah.
Things that are something that may be jeopardizing health and safety. Is there a certain number that they can call? Like, where would they go? Because I know there's different codes, right? Depending on what municipality or what state that you're living in. But just for folks to become aware, you mentioned what made me think about that question was earlier on. You were talking about how different landlords may be neglecting, right, their properties, and those residents have to live in circumstances that are jeopardizing their health and safety. So, but they may not even know who they can call outside of the landlord, right?
Sure.
Because they're technically not the owner, so they just may not even have the knowledge about who they could call to report anything so that they can have a better environment. So in situations like that, like who do you begin to call? How do they know like what city official or code enforcement branch to start to reach out to?
So we always say code enforcement is the catch-all of every city. We say we're the junk drawer of every city where everything falls. In code enforcement, you don't know, you just call code enforcement, and code enforcement will normally route you to the proper channels. So if you have a complaint, so when it comes to the substandard living, and this is kind of where I was getting to, and I lost my train of thought. I was like squirrel. So anyways,
That's okay.
yeah, so when most people know when they're not living in good circumstances. And a lot of people hesitate calling because, oh, they're going to raise my rent or I'm going to get evicted, so, but normally first step is always want to address it with the landlord. Say, hey, this is going on, this light's not working, I have mold, the fan's off, or whatever the situation. When you call your landlord, you're not getting resolution, and you call the city and you can let them know what's going on. Hey, I have mold in my bathroom, or the fan's not working, or the windows aren't opening, and we would normally ask you, have you talked to your landlord? If the answer is yes, then one of the rules is that you have to have functioning equipment in your unit. And so the city is the first place to call. In some jurisdictions, they'll tell you, hey, call the health department and they handle it. But normally there's a way to kind of get the right person to address your concern. But in California, the code enforcement is required to respond in a timely manner, and we assess whether it is whether it is a violation or not. Like, dirty carpet may not rise to the level of a violation, but if it's moldy carpet, or it was wet because of rainfall and stuff like that, that could be a violation. So we have to go out there and assess these situations, and we have to have minimal training to be able to assess those situations.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Now, even though, right, because code enforcement is about essentially helping. It's helping people, right? It's making sure that we're safe. But of course, not everybody responds in a thankful way, right, to those things. And I'm sure you've got just a wide array of experiences and different stories that you can kind of just relate or share. But my question is, like, what are some of the challenges that you faced in kind of implementing like proactive code enforcement strategies, and how have you overcome them?
So, I mean, yeah, you're talking about different levels of, whether management to most code enforcement divisions in the United States are reactive. So we respond to complaints. When it's proactive, you do need normally, a city initiative, or the city saying, hey, we want to improve these neighborhoods. Because I can tell you, I've lived in the hood. I lived in poverty, and
Yeah.
I don't live in, I live in a better location. I can tell you, walking on the street, in that one area and walking on the street in another, there's a sense of yourself. So, when you're in the hood, you're always self-aware. So you tend to ignore everything else around you, the dilapidated house, because you're more concerned about you're not getting mugged, But when you're walking in the neighborhood, you're walking like, oh, wow, look, this is causing, the tall grass, we have fires going on, you start looking at other things.
Yeah.
So, for us, going from reactive to proactive, it takes some work, because you have to define your priorities and say, okay, is this a big deal? Why? What's the reason that we're doing this? And at the end of the day, it just all comes down to education, because most people, when you knock, we're the bearer of bad news. We never come and say, hey, Paul, guess what? You have the best yard in the neighborhood. This is why no, we're saying, hey, Paul, we got a concern regarding this tall grass, and just there's a rise of rodents in the neighborhood. One of the things is, you want to tell people why you're there.
Yep.
Because you do get situations that code enforcement officers sometimes create. Hey, you're in violation of section 1315 of the municipal code, and if you don't mow your lawn by the end of next week, I'm going to give you a citation.
Yeah.
And people just go haywire. So and then they get confrontational, and bad things happen. The first step is always to try to go in there as a partner and saying, hey, I'm here for you. Like, I don't benefit by giving you a citation. The neighborhood benefits by you cleaning your yard. And you have to relay that message in a way that's compassionate and understanding, because what? A single mom who's working, 2 jobs to make ends meet, the last thing she's worried about is that tall grass,
Yeah. Right.
But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, how much time do you need? How can I help you? Do you need resources? If you have those resources, provide them, so you have to be a community partner. That's how you change the narrative from being, that the city, to being a community partner. So that's how you change it from reactive to proactive. And this is one of the things, the strategies that we use at Four Leaf to help communities, initiate that change, because code enforcement gets a bad rap everywhere we go. We're the bearer of bad news, and we're just there to cite people, and we're the bureaucratic red tape that people talk about. We're, and
Well, when you
with,
have enforcement in the title, right, then people may not respond to it the right way.
and this is why you'll see different variations in the titles. You'll see property maintenance inspector, community
Mm,
development, property preservation, neighborhood specialist.
yeah,
So
yeah,
people try to soften the blow, but at the end,
yeah,
it's code enforcement, true and true.
yep.
But what I tell I always call them my customers. I always tell my customers, look, I'm here to help you, and you have to have there's a lot of verbal maneuvering that you have to do with people because right off the bat you have to get their tone, you have to get their physical cues. I mean, just like they read you in a minute, you read them in a minute, and
Yep.
figure out a good way to talk to people, because the way you talk to somebody in an affluent community when you're working affluent versus somebody in a less affluent community, it's a completely different conversation. But
Mm,
at the end of the day, your message has to be the same. Hey, we need this for the sake of the city.
yep.
However you communicate it, because I got into a house full of gangbangers, and you know what, it's scary, but you know what, I was able to show them the respect and say, hey, I'm just here doing my job. This is the goal. And where I'm scared that I might get beat up, where I'm in an affluent community where I'm talking to somebody that just say, hey, I'm going to call my lawyer, and I'm afraid I'm going to be personally sued. So
Hmm.
you have two different dangers there. But at the end of the day, it's look, how much time do you need? How do we help you achieve your goals?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, in what ways do you see like code enforcement kind of evolving to better serve like diverse and growing communities?
Sure. So one of the things that we advocate for is always, hey, do your town halls, do your community meetings, reach
Yep.
out to people, because at the end of the day, you know what, I don't know if you're familiar with the broken window theory, and a broken window theory basically says if you have a broken window and you don't address it, well, what happens is attracts a different variants of other broken windows and criminal elements. When you start neglecting, it kind of goes into a domino effect.
Mm,
And so you have a broken window, then you might have to, hey, that window, nobody's watching that house. You might have people going in them and start trashing it. And then the neighbor next door is like, I don't want to live next to that, moves out, and somebody who doesn't care moves in. When you really look at it, if you can prevent that from the get-go, you set yourself up for success. If you get it right away, you set up for success. Now, getting people involved in, everybody wants to live in a safe neighborhood. I don't know anybody that says, "Hey, I want to live in an unsafe
right.
neighborhood." Everybody wants to live in a safe neighborhood. Just sometimes they don't realize that it's a possibility. So the more people we get involved, and the people that understand the dynamics of different neighborhoods, that's how you get people in different communities and different diversities to understand, the culture. It's not a Latino thing, and it's not a white thing. It's not an elder thing. It's like, what, understand the culture of and understand your audience, because when you talk to, like, somebody that's 70 years old, you're talking to them differently than you're talking to
Yeah,
somebody out of college, that's you're infringing on their rights. So I mean, it's a different conversation.
yeah,
So you need all sorts of diverse people in our industry to be able to deliver the message, and also different temperaments. Sometimes you need somebody that needs to be like this, and sometimes you need somebody that can be very soft spoken and work with
hmm,
people and understanding. But sometimes you need a hammer.
yeah.
So you need your right tools.
Yep, need the right tools, man. No, Pete, this has been great, man. Definitely, it's always a pleasure, man, to kind of sit and chop it up with you to talk about, just code enforcement, the permitting side of things, the health and safety side of things, in this world of construction, but also, just in the built environment at large. And no, man, it's been a pleasure having you on. Before we leave, I do wanna ask you to let us know where we can get that book and what's the title of it.
Sure. The book is called Code Enforcement Officer Lucas Cleans Up Our Street. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Walmart, I believe. So, I'm making a whole 2 cents off each book. So, basically priced it so anybody can just read it to school-age children. It's one of the biggest joys I ever gotten was getting pictures of a code enforcement officer reading it to a group full of kids. I mean, it brings joy to my heart because these kids love that code enforcement officers go out there and do it, and they get introduced to a new set of professionals. You know, you have the what do you have the doctor that cures people. You have the
Yeah.
the police officer that catches bad guys. The fireman that takes the kitties off the the what do you call it, the tree
From
and
the
stuff
burning
like that.
house.
Now
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
out the tree.
you have a
Yeah,
code enforcement officer that keeps the neighborhood safe. And just the evolution of code enforcement. Just before I go, this year we've created the first national code enforcement conference that we're trying to gear up people for a national standardization of code enforcement training,
yeah.
which means we're getting everybody from different states and putting them into Orange County and doing our first national conference called the Code Comply Summit. We needed a
Nice.
catchy name. So
Yeah, yeah. Code Comply Summit. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's revving up. Our guest speaker, one of our guest speakers, is the host of the show Hoarders, Corey Chalmers. So he's going to be one of our speakers, teaching on all-day seminar on hoarding. And our keynote speaker is Ian Hill, who's a very inspirational leader who talks about self-change. And he tells a story of his overcoming like addiction and stuff like that. And it kind of touches, and talks about mental health issues with code enforcement, because we see some stuff that we shouldn't see,
Mm.
and it's unfortunate. We have to evict people out of places that's the last place that they have to go, and
Yeah.
and it's a hard place. But at the end of the day, yeah, that's wanted to give a little plug for it's the Code Comply Summit that's going to be in July 22nd and 24th. So everybody's invited, and hopefully one day we'll get big enough when we can say, hey, I built this can come and be another sector, because as you guys know, you guys are growing. Code enforcement got introduced a couple years ago. You never know what's going to be introduced next. So
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good, brother. Now, thank you for speaking to that. I definitely think that it's something that we need to hear more and bring to the forefront and the surface, because it's a shared experience on some level. If it's not us personally, then we know somebody as well. And so, thank you, Pete, for being on, and appreciate the time, brother.
all right, thank you.